Open Tech Will Save Us number 7. We have, as you've come to expect, 3 big topics of the evening. And tonight, those 3 topics are all about decentralization and running your own systems and just generally getting away from the world. So we will now start to present Holger and Krista from Delta Chat. They are going to, first of all, present what Delta Chat is all about, if you don't know that already, and why would you not? So they will also have a quick chat with Matthew about the nature of open tech and the nature of decentralization and the many sort of contradictions that come along with that.
The terrible name of this meetup, to be precise.
Yeah, I mean, what is open tech, and will it save us? Not convinced. So we'll also hear from David Jacobis, who is representing Meet.coop. Is it Meet.coop, Meet.coop?
I usually say co-op, but then I'm not a native English speaker.
Co-op is right. Ben is being weird.
I think
coop is what coop is what you keep chickens in, Ben, whereas a co-op is a cooperative.
Like that, yeah.
Okay, I see now. I thought it was implying that Meet.coop was keeping people in a coop. But
the English language is very straightforward. I don't know why anyone would be confused.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't we have hyphens in TLDs? And then finally, something that we've been waiting for a long time, something that I've been waiting for since I heard of Matrix, and that is the type of progress on Dendrite that lets us call it beta. And we're going to have a detailed talk from Keegan explaining the progress over the last couple of months, and certainly it's been ramping up like crazy to the point where people are actually deploying it and writing third-party guides and basically getting ahead of matrix.org in getting it tested. So I've rambled. Let's throw it over to Holger.
Yeah, Carissa and me, we're from Delta Chat, and we've had various discussions with especially Matthew, also Amandine in the last 2 years, and on Twitter we also talked a bit about this open tech will save us, but of course that's a trap. Right, it's a trap because you very clearly made this open tech will save us to get everybody to criticize it, so you get to talk about it, and at the end of the criticism, and this is how most criticism actually works, you're going to say, but open is still better, right, than closed. So we can kind of shortcut that kind of discussion, but I think it's interesting to talk about some differences also when it comes to decentralization and also organization and funding and so on. Delta Chat is ongoing for a while, and I'm going to give maybe a 10-minute quick look into Delta Chat, like what is the current status. It's kind of like it's not like a complete status, but it gives some overview for those of you who don't know that much about it. Now let me see, where's my window? Here, I think. Okay, so that's a few slides, and at the end I think we can go for this maybe more critical discussion about the open tech topic. So Delta Chat is chat over email. It's a private messenger, so think of WhatsApp, don't think of Matrix. Think of something like WhatsApp, and Delta Chat actually is the decentralized variant of that. It is oriented UX-wise to Telegram, but in general, we have apps on all platforms, on all app stores for a while now. That's Android, iOS, and all the Microsoft App Store and Mac App Store and so on. And the main point of Delta Chat is there are already private messengers. There's also Wire and others and so on. But this one is really about using the existing email system, because that ties back to a question of what do we do with all the technology that we have across the world. Email servers are already there on a massive scale. And it is an arcane protocol. And where Matrix actually choose to have nice standards, we have to live and work with the existing implementations and standards that are there in the email space. So what does make it interesting is it gives you from the get-go, like our development is obviously very focused on the apps, and it gives you quite a large freedom of choice of what email provider you want to use for your identity. So instead of a telephone number, you use an email provider. It is, and that's the reason why we got some funding from human rights angles from the Open Tech Fund. It is hard to block email servers. Lots of governments and many entities, businesses, and so on depend on email for doing their day-to-day business. So blocking email as compared to blocking Signal, for example, is a lot harder. So they typically don't do it. Also not in Belarus, also not in Russia, and so on. And we don't have to maintain servers. There's no message relay that we would need to do. So all of the, let's say, server-side things that Matrix has evolved, we don't have this problem. But we have to live with the existing postfix, Dovecat, and so on thing. One thing that we have done is in a research project, and we are still kind of improving that. We have actually end-to-end encrypted groups that are safe against active attacks. So we have a reasonable UX workflow that protects a whole group of like 20 participants or so from active attacks without the need for everyone to verify with everyone else. The email topic, it is still the largest messaging network. If you look at email, is not dead. I think it is actually run from a bit of a dubious source. It's like email marketing, so take with a grain of salt. But they have some studies on that they cite on the number of emails per year and per month and so on. And DataChat ties into the whole email addressing system. So you can, from installing DataChat, having it configured with your account, you can contact any email address, not just other people with DataChat. That's a huge difference to what people are used to with messengers like WhatsApp or Signal and so on. So you have centralized messaging. I'm going to do this very quick. That's like Signal, WhatsApp, and so on. And there you typically have what I would call, or what we call passport address books. So your phone number maps to some public key, and then this is your encryption, your cryptographic identity. And in the EU, that most of you probably know, maybe not the people in UK because you're just exiting, but it is, I think, also in Britain, you have this requirement for passport, showing your passport for getting a mobile number. So this is often a problem for activists in many states where they experience repression. One of the major complaints about the existing messages. So we don't do this. You basically use your email provider. Each one uses their own choice of email provider. And the address book then maps basically an email address to the public key cryptographic identity. And what many activists can do, and that's something that you can't do with telephone numbers, you can actually use cell tower outside of your country. Typically, cell towers are always in your country, and the government has a strong grip on cell towers, whereas they can't control if you use something like Posteo or Proton Mail or something from Eastern Europe. And that's why everybody has a choice to actually go outside your jurisdiction, which makes it harder for your repressive state to get at things. So the other thing that is very important, and that at least I've been involved in programming projects for a long time, and open source, like since 20 years or so. And this is the most UX-oriented project I participated in. Björn Peterson started this project, I think 3 years ago now, for his daughter, because he thought it's a bad idea that there's only WhatsApp in school and so on. And he had he brought a very, very strong UX-oriented perspective. So it's not protocol-oriented, it's not coming from security, it's actually coming from, we want to have the real UX, user experience from WhatsApp or Telegram. And why not just use email? So that's basically a major point that you will see in all of the data chat apps, that there's half the work or even more is going into UX, and all of the things that are done underneath are actually driven by UX considerations, not the other way around. We have evolved, I'm not going to cite the full history, from a C core library to Rust. So in the last year, we ported first the whole C thing to Rust, and now to async Rust, and that's now complete. And this core library is used on all the platforms. It implements all of, it's like the most modern email stack you can find. It is chat oriented, but there are plans of some people to actually build a full-fledged email client on top of that. Because with this kind of core library, you get delivery times of like 1 second or 2 seconds device to device. It's very, very fast in terms of reacting. Of course, it also depends on your server configuration, but it's pretty fast as it can get, because there's no interpretation layer. It's a direct system language, very safe. And that is interesting, maybe, because some people actually might want to play with that. The UIs that we have on Android and iOS that are very WhatsApp-like, let's say, they actually use a rather high-level API, and that is very well documented. And this API hides all of the details of IMAP and SMTP and MIME. You will not get at any of these details. You get contacts, chats, messages, and then that's what you need to have. So there could be like something that somebody takes the UI that already is there, that is continuously evolving, and tries to do like a matrix FFI that implements enough so that you can have this kind of private messaging interface on top of the matrix network. The core bindings, we also have, of course, various languages, Python, JS, Node. They are maintained also separately, so you can use them in Node and pip install and so on. And the Swift and Java bindings, they are only in the iOS and Android repos, but they could be separated if needed. Security, it's using the AutoCrypt standard, which is an opportunistic standard, and then some things on top to guard against active attacks. And it uses a security-reviewed full Rust PGP library. The general take of DeltaChat is that we like to avoid talking about keys. So in the user interface of DeltaChat, you will not be questioned about anything regarding keys. We have 2 independent security reviews that the last one just finished on the kind of whole core library, and we had one on the RPGP engine, which is like 11,000 lines of code, and that has passed. So everything is fixed, and there weren't actually real critical things. It's Rust, so it's not so easy to mess up completely. And we have this particular thing against active attacks. This would be like a whole session topic, so I'm not going into this right now. We also have our laboratory server, where we actually experiment and kind of try to optimize typical postfix stovecut configurations, and where we also perform user testings on also its own topic. We use that also in Eastern Europe quite a bit. Yeah, there's some more things in the background going on there, but I won't mention this. Funding-wise, what we got so far is very little, at least compared to other projects. Some of the things started with EU funding. That's when Björn and me and then others joined. And then we had 2 open tech funds fundings, and they have crashed now, as some of you probably know. Open Tech Fund is kind of inoperable currently. And we got an NLN fund. And we are actually for 2021 aiming for also some kind of a startup funding thing. It's not VC, but it's basically money from the German government. And we also just got accepted for some more NLNet funding. It is interesting, I think, in general, and this is now leading more to the like more technology-oriented, what are we doing, open tech, and so on. I think that you probably are all aware of Conway's Law. Conway's Law says that the way how you actually program, your architecture, is actually reflective or actually comes from your social organization. So the classical example is if you have three departments in a company, you will have three components in the software architecture with defined interfaces. This is very simple, like a very simple example. But of course, there's more questions regarding this. Because as soon as you start to structure in a certain way, let's say as a startup or maybe as an NGO, there's like a couple of projects that are doing, trying to get donations and so on and drive things from there for the good cause and get people to donate. Thunderbird is one example of that. Or there's VC capital. And I think this ties to the social organization. Like the way how you do this, it will also, you cannot avoid it influencing the way how you do the software. And when I talk about we, I like to say that, it's not like a complete description, especially now with COVID-19, everything has gone a bit strange, not only for us, I guess, but also for others. But when I talk about we, this we is actually some kind of a weak we. It's not like this very strong group that has like very strong principles and like some kind of written foundation on how it operates and so on. It's a relatively weak we, but there's a lot of coherence by people talking with each other. And these are typically, we used to do something like every 2 or 3 months gatherings of like 20, 30 people. And then there would be lots of peer-to-peer decentralized discussions on how things happen. This has now become harder. And I think what's now happening with us is that we are basically forking off conversations from IRC, from GitHub, from chat groups in smaller groups. So it's not a scheduled clock meeting. It's basically 2 or 3 people discussing one topic and then feeding it back, but on their own agency. They're not asking for permission anybody if they can discuss this topic. So I think it's very important to actually, for me, it has been very important to think about the way how we actually do things together, how we organize, and not just default to the typical office clock scheduling. Let's make a meeting at 10 o'clock and then one at 11 o'clock and then one at 12 o'clock and so on. Because I think this will shape your software and the decisions you make in your software. It's also what I call, along with a couple of other people, hacking with care. So that's, in brief, a bit of a perspective on this, like how we do things. The main difference with Matrix, I would say, is that Matrix is more on the level, like if you see it in terms of competition, it's more on the level of Slack, like, providing an open variant of Slack and also enabling lots of other things that can be done. But the primary kind of user interface, at least I have been seeing in the last years, has been like an super-powered IRC, like Slack and some other things. That there's also virtual reality and lots of experiments, but like the core thing is this. And Delta Chat is not that. It's not like it doesn't present rooms in that sense. There are bots that do that, but the core interface currently it presents a private messenger user interface. It uses existing server infrastructure. It uses this async Rust. And while we have less funding, a lot less funding than we maybe could get, it also means, and that feels quite good right now, less obligations. So we actually can listen to users from Cuba, from Belarus, and from many other perspectives, and actually engage there, because we don't need to, at least currently, we don't have like big deliverables that we have externally. This will change in 2021, but it's a nice break actually to not have this strong outbound pressure. Lastly, and maybe as a bit of a provocation, on tech complexity, So if Matrix is a Tesla, then Delta Chat is more like an electrical bicycle.
I love that one.
That's something I came up with Carissa when we talked about this session a week ago. So with that, I would like to, there's more I could say, of course, but I'd like to leave it at that. And then, hear from you, and maybe Carissa has something to add, but I give the word back to you, and we'll also switch off my screen sharing.
Yeah, I would just love to hear, their thoughts, and I'll chime in as necessary, since you've talked for a while about Delta Chat.
Cool. I guess it's with me. First of all, thank you so much for coming on Open Tech Will Save Us. Thanks, Holger. Thanks, Carissa. And it's great to hear more about Delta Chat. And hope this makes it clear that Open Tech Will Save Us is not just about Matrix, but getting everybody from the open communication and sort of technology community together. I think I might just quickly respond to the slight provocation of Teslas versus electric bicycles, which makes me think of a Sinclair C2, if anybody ever encounters one of those things. Amazing bicycle with a whole bunch of D-cell batteries up the main axle of it, like the first electric bike. I think you might be conflating Element and Matrix slightly together, in that I totally agree that the Element is a quite all bells and whistles, Slack. In theory, it should also be usable for WhatsApp use cases, but certainly it has the collaboration use case pinned down. The Matrix as a protocol is relatively light, and we do have async Rust core in Matrix Rust SDK. Not deployed everywhere yet, but I think the Fractal guys are using it now on GTK and the like. And just as you've done that transition from C, we've been doing it from all the various native platforms, or sort of purple. I think we had the JavaScript, and we had the Kotlin and Objective-C code base, which are now converging on the Rust thing in some places at least. But I don't know where to respond, really. First of all, I think it would be awesome to bridge things together. There is absolutely no reason why we don't have AutoCrypt and Delta Chat flavored email to Matrix bridges back and forth. We should just link the networks together. We've just done a bunch of work with the XMPP bridge over the last week, which means that it's actually properly usable. I've been using it for IETF stuff, and also stalking the XSF muck. And if we can do it with XMPP, we should do it with Delta Chat as well. And I think that would be really, really cool. In terms
end-to-end encryption, right?
Well, that would be, I guess, the interesting thing here. So does AutoCrypt have forward secrecy in it at the moment?
No, it doesn't.
Okay. So I guess we're fundamentally going to be talking quite different dialects of encryption, and we will have no choice but to re-encrypt to go between the Olm and the Megon domain through to AutoCrypt land, which is a shame. But perhaps if people can end up running their own bridges in their own domains, and if the bridge is running in a trusted domain under their own infrastructure, then that's better than nothing, and it's certainly better than a centralized bridge. So I mean,
are you thinking? Sorry, just to ask
a
a question about bridges. Are you thinking about running an email service, or like what in bridge in your head? What is that?
Good question. I think it would be a bridge probably where you would chuck in a SMTP and an IMAP server, and it would allow you to receive Delta Chat style messages on your existing email infrastructure, and then mirror it through onto the Matrix side, re-encrypting there. And you want to run it yourself, obviously, on your own mail infrastructure. So my mail server, for instance, is right there under my desk, and I would want to run the bridge next to it, next to the Cyrus IMAP-D and the XM MTA that it's running, and it also happens that my home service running on it too. So that would, I mean, does that make sense technically?
Maybe. I don't know. I think there's various ways on how to do this bridging, and this would be a good topic if we, for some reason, find place and time to be in the same area for a week or so. Then this could be sorted out between various people. I think it's not completely obvious how to do end-to-end encryption. And it might be that maybe the Delta Chat UX at some point learns to also talk to Matrix. You know?
Yeah.
If there's Rust client-side things, we could basically think about mixing it in the client. So there doesn't need to be any kind of bridging per se. this seems like a bit more like the obvious way to go about it. It also could mean that Matrix grows like a private messenger interface. I dare to say that if you actually use it a bit, Data Chat, many people are saying that it's really pretty refined already in terms of what you can get in UX. And we are still working on it and improving several things. So I think this kind of integrating at the Rust level, that would be like the condition, because we can only do Rust on all platforms. You cannot use anything else, basically.
That makes sense.
Basically, but then we could actually, if we mixed in communicating with Matrix, that could work. That's one approach. Another would be to represent the cryptographic identities within each of the spaces. So the Matrix identity would be represented in the email space, and the email's identity would be represented in the Matrix space. And by that, the existing clients could use it. But then, of course, if you want to make this end-to-end encrypted, we have to agree on some way to do the encryption. Luckily, I mean, at least for, let's say, Rust-based things, we have like a complete solution, right? I mean, we have the full engine, and that's like packaged, and so you wouldn't need to re-implement this. You get like a fully compatible security-ready thing that you could integrate. That would be, I would say, like the second integration possibility. Yeah. Maybe there's a third one, I don't know. But this is like, these would be like, for me, the two obvious ways to try.
It's the kind of irony with the end-to-end encryption, sort of different bubbles that we've ended up with. And it could be a MIMO on XMPP, it could be libsignal protocol for Signal, it could be OM and MEGOM for Matrix, or it could be DMLS on Matrix, the decentralized version of MLS that we've been experimenting with. That you're right, that you can do it by basically doing a multi-head client. Now, we could take our Rust SDK and we could have it also speak autocrypt in the dialect of end-to-end encryption that Delta Chat uses, and vice versa on the other side. It almost feels like you end up with the two protocols sitting side by side. And from an engineering perspective, this is starting to feel a little bit weird. We can also put an XMPP client in there too. We put a Signal client, and before we know it, we've got 4 different stacks on one client talking to 4 different stacks on the other client, and it's kind of
it's manageable if you do it. I mean, it's a bit. I don't want to go crazy on Rust also, but I think if actually there's like an agreement to do this in Rust, I think this complexity would be manageable. I've done 20 years of Python, and I wouldn't try it in Python. Like, it's like, no way, right? It just, things would break left and right, and it's like horrible. And also not JavaScript. And even with Go, I would be very skeptical. But, that in Rust, I would say, well, maybe that could be possible. I think it depends on the social organization, to get back to this point. Because when you, Matthew, I was very happy that you... I think Xenia invited you. She is still with us in Data Chat when Autocrypt started in Berlin, end of 2017. I don't know. All these years, they seem very far away now. But you were there for a couple of days, and I think it really depends on finding ways to actually be together, and that means making the time, and then seeing what comes out of people discussing this. So I think technically there's various ways, but it will depend on this kind of social organization. And I'm actually curious, if I may ask directly, when it comes to social organization, I mean, Matrix has an element. You have a lot of VC funding, and you have like big customers. And I wonder how this reflects on, how you can go about things, because you now have like customer goals and so on.
Yeah, I mean, this is Conway's law encapsulated. The reason why we ended up having to raise so much money on the Matrix, on the Element side, was to support the Matrix core team, which is 12 people at the point that we basically lost our jobs and needed to find substantial funding to keep things going. I think if we'd grown organically, like a typical open source project, if this was like Linus sitting in his bedroom writing a kernel and it kind of organically grows from there, then it's a lot easier to gradually sort of bootstrap things up. But instead, just the history of where the project came from meant that we had 12 people who one day had job being hired and sponsored to work full-time on Matrix, and the next day they didn't. So, hiring 12 people it costs a significant amount of cash, like more than OTF grant, although we did apply to OTF too. They ended up funding the Megom security audit rather than actually funding the project outright. And so we were kind of forced into we need to raise VC funding and do the more traditional capitalist route with Element to provide services for customers. And you're totally right that as a result, like right now, a lot of the core Matrix team is frankly distracted going and doing stuff which is driven by the various Element customers. Everything we do is aligned with the overall project, but suffice to say, it's not always the top thing on the list. Like right now, there's a lot of work on VoIP, which we haven't spoken about much, to make VoIP really, really good on Matrix. And I think it would be fair to say that making VoIP not suck was probably 10th on the list. But because the customer turned up and said, look, we will fund all of your VoIP work to make this thing kick ass, we said, okay, that comes to the top of the list. And as a result, probably things which, for the greater good of Matrix, might have happened first, get bumped down slightly. So it's not ideal at all. And it definitely ends up steering us that way. But on the plus side, it means that we do end up with the cash to keep the core team employed. And in the end, it hopefully all works out. But it's a very, very different sort of strategy than the more organic one. And frankly, I'm quite jealous of being able to do it organically, even if it's a bit more stressful and there's less cash to go around. But as you say, you have more freedom and no commitments in terms of that. So, I mean, it's just different ways to solve the problem. And we have the foundation, of course, to keep us honest. Amandy.
If I can jump in. Also, the fact we have customers is good for the ecosystem as a whole. Like, features are good, but what you need in the end are users. And the Matrix network is going to grow if there are people using it. And if you have millions of civil servants coming from governments, then it's good for the network. So it's basically a balance on, we could do more feature for the greater good, but what is pushed down by the customers, they balance it by the fact that they are a big marketing tool. If you can say, hey, this and this government are using this project, then hey, it means you can trust it. They bring users, they bring visibility, they bring credibility. So it's a balance. It's just bringing different things to make the project successful.
Yeah, I think this further highlights the Tesla versus electric bicycle discussion, where having more customers and more features is more complex, and it makes it difficult for people to just get started with it. I think the fact that you've explicitly tried to make Matrix a simple protocol is really nice, though, and I'm really happy that you've done that. I think it's a positive thing. But yeah, I think that's something to be wary of going forward, probably. I think as users, we would, developer users.
Yeah, totally. And I guess the next logical step is for us to start a space company and then start selling the DoD the ability to drop missiles on any country in the world within an hour, or whatever SpaceX was up to yesterday.
Well, that actually brings into a conversation that might be related, which is what are the simplest parts of Matrix that could be kept the same forever? This is something that is very useful about email, is that it probably won't change. So are there parts of Matrix that probably won't change that could be, locked, or something that we could depend upon?
Yeah, I mean, this is super topical because you probably saw that the IETF has spun up a Matrix instance to trial as a complement to their XMPP stuff. And there's a big, I wouldn't use the word flame war, but heated discussion on the IETF tools discuss list about where does Matrix fit in with this, and why aren't we doing it all on XMPP? And interestingly, some of the XMPP community, like Matt Wild specifically, said, hey, Matrix is great as a complementary protocol to XMPP and SMTP, and we should standardize it, and we should encourage the IETF to standardize it. And that in turn has spawned a great big discussion of, is Matrix mature enough to do that? And would it be a good thing? How does it work relative to the Matrix standards track? Is it going to be a fork? And all this good stuff. But it's something that's actively being discussed. And frankly, we're eventually getting towards a point where the core of Matrix might be stable enough to put it in stone tablets and give it a RFC number. But It depends on how much you trust the ITF's process, I guess, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing for a protocol to get immortalized as an RFC or calcified, ossified as a RFC, petrified.
It doesn't have to be permanently stuck in a mode. It's more like a checkpoint to say this is the matrix version at this point, and then it can continue to evolve.
That's the idea, but it's not always how it's worked out in the end. Like, I'm not sure precisely how the XMPP governance relates to the RFC, but I think
I think it's also interesting how those governance and roadmap issues relate to the sustainability models that you were talking about a minute ago. How the role of the users, what is the role of the users in the governance of the project, and specifically in the roadmap? Where is the project going, and how that changes when you bring in funding from VCs or from just paying customers who suddenly have a say on prioritization of issues, or even what goes in and what doesn't in terms of features.
Also, what Amadine said in terms of, it is very interesting to actually have like real interested users and customers actually driving things, and not just open source developers thinking about the next iteration of their grand protocol, or of their grand code base. And I think that's very valid. And in DeltaChat, we have this a lot, but not so much on the business side. It's like private messaging. So just as an example, like a week ago, we basically discussed, okay, what are the most interesting features? And while a number of us were discussing about the next generation of like the great security scheme against active attacks, the outcome from the Cubans, there's like a big Cuban user base. So they did a poll, just like ad hoc, like within 1 hour, and they had like 150 votes or so on what they want to have. And top of the list was swipe to reply. Second was jump to last read message, because currently, you basically have to scroll up yourself to see all of the, and now these two things were now implemented, because it's pretty clear that this is like where the focus is, right? So especially in messaging, when you talk to developers, you will always get into huge security discussions. Security, crypto, it's very strong, very, very strong. The force is strong with crypto. And I think it's, when it comes to users, in many ways, they usually have like totally different problems. Like, for example, how to organize their work, how to stay organized, how to not drown in chaos of channels and whatnot, how to find back things, how to, do everyday interactions. How fast is the thing? So we worked a lot on, switching a chat that it actually only takes a fraction of a second. So it feels like immediate. So there was a whole refactoring in iOS with the aim, it's going to be released soon, to just make things faster. So it feels like instant. You just switch chats and everything is fast. It's not like this split second where you have the feeling something is happening. So all of these UX issues, and that's they come from real people feeding back. And we have the added mess of having to deal with lots of different providers. So for example, the configuration time when you configure your account, it used to be sometimes 15, 20 seconds, and now it's like down to 5 seconds or 3 seconds sometimes. And it's important, like you enter your email and your password, you hit configure, and it does like, and it's there. It feels different than, this long-winded, and then there's an error message at the end or so. And these things take a lot of work to actually, for us, because we don't have like a nice streamlined server like Matrix has. So driving things from user expectations and real user experiences is very important. I'm just afraid that if you are focusing very much on, let's say, civil servants and people like in large organizations, that of course that's quite a different drive than having, let's say, Cubans or people, from Belarus and so on. But of course, they also don't have money. I mean, Cuba is like completely broke, so you cannot extract any money from there. And it's not our intention, actually. We just, like very much that they act as an early adopter base. They're like the most active. They make tournaments in chess and whatnot, organized via data chat, and poll bots and weather bots and lots of things. And it's a very lively community, and we very much enjoy that. And actually let it drive some of the developments in data chat, even though there's no money. And that's so it is user driven, but there is the big question that all of the open source projects have, at least since 20 years. Everybody's discussing it all the time, like how to deal with this money thing, like how to get this together, and
Actually, we've got some questions from the chat on that subject, in fact. So there's some questions here about stats about adoption. So I know that Delta Chat is super popular. You already mentioned it, actually, in Cuba and Belarus. Do you have any stats on those user bases that you can share in terms of size?
Yeah, we have only on Google Play, there's counting, and there's something like 100,000 downloads. On iOS, it's less because we are still not doing a notification service. So things don't arrive in the background, but that's going to change soon. So that's like 10, 20,000 or so, I don't really know. And then we have F-Droid, where many people actually install it, and all of the desktop ones where we don't have download stats, and the Cubans who install things from USB sticks. So it's kind of like, I would say, 200,000 maybe, like this. It's enough for us in terms of getting feedback. If you look at the support forum, we are kind of swamped in like quite detailed feedback. So for the things that we are now doing with the Startup Secure funding that we go for in 2021, that's a lot more business oriented, where we actually are thinking about server-side integration, also with video chat and so on. But again, with a strong remaining focus on private messaging. So we're not trying to compete with Slack or Matrix or something like this.
Yeah. So while we're on that, there's one more question from Pressgas, who asks about the Delta Chat and how it interacts with two-factor authentication. So, for example, he points out that recent Office 365 and Exchange migrations that are used by educational institutions, they require two-factor. Is that something that's still supported with Delta Chat?
Well, for example, Google OAuth works.
Right.
So you can actually log into your Gmail account using OAuth, not with a custom domain, but with the standard Google Mail domains. So in principle, we can do it. But that's kind of provider specific, the Gmail thing. It also works with Yandex in Russia. Like every time we do something for a very big Western evil company, we also try to do something for Eastern evil company. So that's kind of neutral there.
The Cold War was over, but okay.
Sorry?
The Cold War ended.
Well, yes, but now there's evil companies everywhere in organizations and states. Like, it's like Cold War kind of in a totalitarian way. Or name me, like, off the top of your head, one state, except New Zealand, where you think it's doing great.
People always like to talk about the Scandinavian countries, I think.
I know some people from Sweden and Denmark, and they would disagree, I think. But okay.
All right, I think we're going on to a new topic here. So there's one more tech topic. Is there any hope for a Mail 2.0 compatibility effort with Delta Chat, Proton Mail, etc.?
We are talking with all these people, and like the people from Tutanota, we have met them twice. And Proton Mail, we regularly meet them, and so on. And again, I think it's mainly a matter of the social organization. There was actually a prospective AutoCrypt Next Generation 2.0, and with Tutanota people and Proton Mail people in April 2020. That didn't happen.
Right.
So now we have to see. I mean, it's really a matter of this getting together. I think there's goodwill on all of the sides.
Yeah.
and we basically have to get to it somehow.
Okay.
Despite
I mean, what sort of compatibility features would need to go into Mail 2.0 to call it progress?
I would say like a kind of encryption scheme, like Proton Mail is not so far from AutoCrypt compatibility. Tutanoto has been planning it for a while, and so I think AutoCrypt is the base layer, and I think we have new work upcoming. It's just brewing, basically, in doing something like protected. The main criticism of AutoCrypt from Proton Mail and Tutanota, but especially from Proton Mail, is it's like too opportunistic. You cannot be sure that you are encrypting, right?
Okay.
And we have been doing some work, and we are now focusing on this in the next 1-2 months to actually get like to a next level of doing this, like a next UX level. And I talked also to some people from Matrix at the last Congress in Leipzig.
Yeah, it was me and Half
So
Shot.
we have this key verification things going on, and so there could be something in terms of how can we verify keys through QR codes, what are the protocols that actually works across these different ecosystems. But you have to understand, Tutanota and Proton Mail are providers. So they are trying to sell hosting and like their own apps. So there's kind of like, because of the way how they get their funding, it's quite different from what DataChat is doing. We're not running any hosting business. We are just trying to be like a compatible client. So I can understand that for them it's a bit harder to actually do this. But they do
push in the same direction. I mean, ultimately, that's the marker of whether you can make progress. All right. Unless there's any final comments, I think we should wrap it up just because we've run a little long after starting a little late. But thank you. Thank you to everybody, to Carissa and Holger, Matthew and Amandine too, and David. So what's next?
Thank you.
We got more on the agenda. So I don't know if you know about meet.coop. Some idiots call it meet.coop, whereas it's not. It's meet.coop. It's a fine service. They provide BBB, Matrix, and other things. And we have David, who's going to tell us all about their infrastructure and maybe touch on, why it's important to self-host and to not use the big providers. So I'll leave it to you, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen. There you go. Okay, you don't see me anymore. First of all, 2 things about me. I'm David. David is okay. David is fine. I work at Fempro Comuns, which is a workers' cooperative based in Barcelona. We do many different projects, all with the aim to broaden the commons, especially the digital commons, understood as things that have value and that are owned by a community. So we provide some services like Commons Cloud, which is basically a Nextcloud and Discourse and a project manager and other services to collaborate online. And we, as everyone else in the world at the beginning of this year, started to do everything online. Every meeting, every workshop, every course, conferences, everything that we do or that we participate on was suddenly happening online. So we started to play around with Jitsi and Big Blue Button and other free and open source conferencing systems. And we did like Big Blue Button. It was originally developed for educational purposes, so it has many features like moderation, breakout rooms, polls, many of them especially crafted or oriented to this sort of application, to learning environment. So we tried it. It was good, but it costs a lot of money to operate yourself a good video conferencing platform that can host, I don't know, 50 people at the same time. I mean, a small Jitsi server is great for things like this with 5, 6, 10 people. But if you want to have up to 50 people with video and audio streams, it just won't make it. So we started with other cooperatives this Meet.coop experiment, which is what you see here, a conferencing platform powered by free software and operated by cooperatives. We started it just for us, but very soon we saw there was a need for such a service for other similar organizations who didn't have the technical know-how to operate such a service. So we decided to open it to membership from others and to try to build a sort of network of cooperatives that can provide this kind of services to other actors in the commons and social economy, let's say. So if you are a cooperative that, I don't know, that grows food and you need a digital platform to do your stuff, you can buy it from a similar minded organization as Meet.coop and not from Google, Amazon, Facebook, etc. And we have a bunch of other projects in mind that we might do someday. So what do we have as a common ground? Well, we have these cooperative principles that we all agree on, even though some of the co-ops are not like your traditional cooperatives, but still these principles we can sign them off, all of us. And we ask any other organization who wants to join as a active member of Meet.coop to agree to this principle. So what are these members? What are Meet.coop members? Well, we have two types of membership. You can just be a user member, and it works as if you were contracting a service from a company. You are just making a contribution, paying a fee, and then you have access to a service. But you actually have access to other stuff because you become a member of the Meet.coop cooperative, even though we still don't have a legal entity. It's not. It's just a collective of different cooperatives. But you can participate in the governance of the cooperative and participate in any of the working groups of the cooperative. But for organizations that want to be a part of this and help move it forward, there's the operational membership. And for this, first of all, you need to be aligned with the principles by which we started this experiment. There's the you commit to dedicate a number of hours to tasks that are defined collectively in each of the working groups, or if you don't have the hours, or you don't have the people, or you just have the money, you can contribute an amount of money instead of this volunteering these hours. And then this entitles you, being an operational member entitles your people who belong to your organization to request compensation for work they did inside me.co. So there's a lot of work in building and maintaining and making such a thing grow, such a service grow. And one of the things we had very, we agreed upon since the very beginning is that we aim to provide fair wages to everyone who works at me.co. It's not a volunteer-based project. It's not an NGO. And we don't want to look for other sources of funding other than membership fees, other than our member contributions. And last but not least, operational members are expected to participate in one or more working groups and participate in the decision-making meeting. So it's not just that you pay this amount of money and get this service, get your logo in the page, and all is good. You're supposed to do stuff as a operational member. So who are the members? This is a horrible picture, I know, and I apologize for any graphic design oriented members of the audience, but it is what it is. So you may see some familiar names here. I think this is almost up to date, like 2 weeks ago. We have a few more now, but this is without taking into account the individual members. So you go to the me.co website and buy a individual membership. These are the organizations that have become members. And in the center egg area, you have the operational members, which are the ones driving this thing forward. And around it, you have the organizations that are organization members, user members. So they pay for a multi-user account inside the me.co infrastructure. So we started this in May. We started talking about it in April and meeting in April and May. In June, we already had a service that we were using internally. And we were sort of in a hurry because we were approached very early by the Open 2020 organizers. This is a quite large conference that used to happen in the UK and now happens online, at least for this year. And they wanted to run it. They didn't want to use Zoom or whatever. And they wanted to run it with us. So we managed to deploy a stable service, and it was a success. Since then, we have worked a lot in internal organization, setting up all the processes and the working groups and all the structure that you need to operate such a international service. And we are now, all these processes are pretty much in place. What we have to do now is make it more faster and more solid from the infrastructure point of view, and just get more people to join from the, let's say, business or sale point of view. We have done no efforts in terms of sales. We just got the word around and have lots of organizations approaching us. especially with conferences in mind, I guess, because everyone is worried about what the tool that you use tells about your organization. So if you organize a conference about the cooperative world and you use the tool from a company that is very well known for extracting value from people's personal data, that that probably won't sit very well with your expected audience. So in that sense, the moment, as bad as it is, in this sense, it could be an opportunity. It was a huge opportunity for people like Zoom, who exploded in February and March. They had, like, I don't know, 100 times the user base that they had 1 or 2 months before. But it can also help initiatives like this. So these are the service levels. I won't go into the detail, but you have you have a demo server, you have the basic individual service for €10 a month, up to multi-user accounts for €100 a month. And then we have an event server that you can rent for a week, and we can deploy a dedicated server for your organization if you do lots of online events. And all of these service levels, except the demo, which you don't need to, you just need to sign up, but all the others give you access to all the discussions, meetings, and you can participate in any of the working groups. You are a full member of the cooperative. So it is more expensive. These service levels I just showed are more expensive than Zoom or any of the other proprietary corporate operated services. So why is it? First of all, it's a matter of scale. We are still a very small operation, and the larger you are, the cheaper you can get your service to be. We are also aiming to pay fair wages with these fees, which many of these companies don't always pay, not to all their employees. And we aim to be as friendly as we can with the environment. We are looking for hosting providers that use renewables and that are as efficient as possible. But most importantly, I think we don't monetize users' data. We don't try to lure you into a whole ecosystem of closed applications. We, of course, don't place ads, and we don't use this to attract users with a free or very cheap service and then trap you with someone else, with something else. Sorry. But one important point is that it doesn't need to be more expensive. If we scale it up, it can be maybe not as cheap as Zoom, but almost as cheap as Zoom. So what are we going to do when we start getting a lot of money after we pay fair wages to everyone who contributes? What do we do with the excess? Because I do think that this is going to work up and it can be successful in terms of business. So we, first of all, we want to scale it and then make it affordable to everyone. Well, we want to also fund other initiatives that can provide services, alternatives to proprietary services. And we want to contribute back to the Big Blue Button, Greenlight, and all the other communities that create these great products. And that goes back to the discussion we were having before about who drives development and who drives this these projects. We would love to see other cooperative initiatives like this one that can give fair wages to people who operate these services, and that can contribute back to the communities that develop these services, many times much underpaid. And finally, this is another horrible slide to look at, where you have some links. You're very, very welcome to join us at meet.coop, join the forum, say something by email or in the forum. We are waiting for you with open arms.
Fab. Thank you, David. Can we? Thank you for the presentation. Really, really nice, clear explanation of how you're running a co-op and how you're trying to sort of grow the space ethically. Can you just remind me what are the products that you're offering? You do BBB.
We have lots of services that we use internally or that we use to organize the community and to help us communicate. But the product that we offer as an external service is the Big Blue Button service.
Right, gotcha. Sorry, I thought that they were more offered externally as well. So yeah, but you're using Discourse and Matrix internally, of course.
Yes.
Okay. And that's the main thing. Then that's what the Open 2020 conference wanted. They wanted the video Big Blue Button. And I guess the thing they get from that as well is, being able to do breakout rooms. It's not just like we're doing a stream here. You can also have small rooms. Yeah,
you can have breakout rooms. But technically, we did play around with Jitsi. It has some advantages, especially if you have a large number of people, like over 50 people. Then you don't have issues with the if you want to share slides, for example, instead of sharing your video stream, you upload the slides, and the slides go to every client, and they are saved in the client, and then that makes it much faster. It never happens that the presenter's video signal freezes, and then you have to stop, and that sort of thing doesn't happen. So there's a technical question here, which is, what is Greenlight? Because I've got people asking that in the chat. And I've heard about this with Big Blue Button, but never understood it myself. So Big Blue Button has two very distinct components. The backend is Big Blue Button itself, manages room creation and everything related to the meeting rooms, and of course the handling of audio and video streams. And Greenlight is let's say the reference front end, where it manages users, user groups, and permissions, and it requests the room creation and management actions from the backend. Got it. So it's like it's both a front end and a command to do the controlling. Right? There are actually very nice integrations to replace Greenlight with many learning systems like Moodle, but also with WordPress, Nextcloud, and because Big Blue Button has a quite clean API, so it's not difficult to interact with it. I can say something is in the works for Matrix as well, for Element actually, because this is often discussed with universities. So there's one question here about Meet.coop itself, which is to say, is operational membership something for private people as well, for individuals, or is it purely your chart showed mostly other co-ops? Yes. So more like corporate sponsorship? We we do have some individual operational members. Most of the operational members are other cooperatives or other organizations, but we do have some individuals.
Cool. So yes, it's available. Were there any questions from the crowd?
Well, I had one. Where are the servers hosted? Sorry if I missed this.
We're currently hosting in Canada.
Okay, cool.
With a provider, which is actually a cooperative provider called Combit.
There's co-ops all the way around.
Yes, and we are about to deploy infrastructure in Europe as well, because I would say now, most of the users are actually based in Europe, so it doesn't make much sense to operate from Canada.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, yourself, you're in Spain, I think.
Yes, I mean, we will keep the Canada server, but we will add infrastructure in Europe as well.
Understood.
Do you know about the host sharing people? Host sharing, there in Germany, they're also an old co-op, and we are working with them a bit. They also offer various services, and I think they already are a co-op. I think they exist like 20 years. Hostsharing.net.
Yes.
If you want to get in contact, also I can bring you into contact with some people. I think it's very similar, basically, to.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think I met someone from their co-op a while ago. I was looking at the other screen because I saw an email thread about a hosting co-op, but it's something else. It's Indie Hosters, which was not in my slide because they joined last week, I think. But yeah, we are actually building a pretty comprehensive map of all the hosting co-ops, because we are in an interesting position to collaborate. For example, right now, most of the operational work, like deploying the servers and the systems side of it, is mostly done by Colocol, which is also a workers cooperative in Germany, because we offer very similar services, but to very different audiences. So we can. There's a lot of room for cooperation.
Fab, thank you. I just wanted to hang on because I think there might be a couple of questions coming in. But otherwise, I wanted to say thank you, David. Here's the question. So is there a directory of co-ops somewhere? I suppose the membership list of meet.coop is itself a sort of directory.
Yes.
But is there a more general directory?
I don't know of one. It would actually be very interesting to build one, because I mean, I've seen some at national level. I had a website. I would need to look it up, but at least I had one for France and one for Germany, which I think have a long history of technology-oriented co-ops. Canada is basically Europe. Yeah,
that's one way to think about it.
But yeah, it would be interesting to build a global directory. It would be very interesting.
All right. Thank you again, David. And people who are interested to find out more about meet.coop, they must go to meet.coop. Type that into your browser. We have a final contender. I want to say welcome to Keegan. Keegan, you'll have seen him in the Dendrite rooms and in the repo, coding away.
Yeah, that's what I do.
So you've got something to present, which is the Dendrite beta.
Yeah. So, Dendrite in general, really. So
I always thought it was about the future, not the beta
yeah,
stuff.
well,
The beta is
I'm you short.
It's like 2 days ago. It's old history now.
Okay, so Okay, cool. Right, let's get into it. Can you see screen and everything? Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Beautiful. Thank you. So first of all, hello. I'm Keegan, and with Neil, we are the core Dendrite team. And basically, yeah, today I want to talk a bit about Dendrite, what it's like now and where it's heading in the future. So really, I'm not going to go into too much detail about where it is now, because a lot of that is contained in the blog posts, which is done a few days ago, as well as the README file and the changes file on the Dendrite repository. But in general, the beta was released last week. It was very well received as far as I can tell. Fingers crossed. There are issues to iron out, as you know, it's not been battle tested with lots and lots of different servers in the wild just yet. But we're getting there, and ultimately, it's a solid foundation for us to work with and as a base for future work. So most of the core features are implemented in Dendrite at the moment, which is great. There's still a few missing features such as receipts, but overall, we've kind of got all the core kind of room auth and state resolution and all those things in there with federation and stuff like that. But yeah, if you want to know more information, blog post is probably the best thing that has lots of history in there as well. But I'm not going to go into this presentation because that's just going to be repeating myself. So where we're going to the future. So really, there's three kind of tracks that I want to kind of focus on that you can kind of split it into. The first is the parity track, which is basically trying to get Dendrite to be roughly the same as Synapse, so people can actually choose between Dendrite and Synapse. I mean, at the moment, you can't really choose between the two because Dendrite's missing a bunch of features. So trying to get the Dendrite to be actually a contender and an actual viable alternative to Synapse is something that we've been focusing on very recently, which I'll go into a bit later. The second track is scaling. So, when we made Dendrite, we designed it to be horizontally scalable. We have only we've not really implemented a lot of the potential avenues for horizontal scalability. That's again, something which can come into the future. So we're talking primarily sharding the same component. At the moment, you can't do that, but we would like to add the ability to do that. And then the third track is peer-to-peer. So we did a little bit of peer-to-peer work at the beginning of the year, and we had a few little demos that got released. And basically, we'd like to kind of revisit some areas of that and experiment with some new peer-to-peer stuff and just try to get another feel. Now that we have a solid foundation to work with, get a better feel for how peer-to-peer can actually work now. So the first one is parity, and you don't have to worry, we are not rewriting Dendrite in PHP, as the image may suggest. For context here, this slide actually was given by Neil 5 months ago, okay? So this is not the current percentages. You can see the little date at the bottom. So what I want to do is just illustrate how far we've come in these 5 months. So it was 33% and 26%. And now we're sitting at a much healthier 56 and 79%. This is quite a big achievement. And I think, going forwards, one of the things we want to focus on is, particularly for federation, getting the federation percentages up to 100% would be ideal. Client server will still take a lot more time to do because there's just so many more features out there. But for now, this is kind of where we're at. Yeah, so we focus on parity basically since, I don't know, maybe April, I guess, maybe May. And those percentages I just showed you, those were the PsyTest compliance percentages, which are not exactly perfect. They're just some indicator that we are kind of meeting the matrix spec. It's better than nothing, ultimately. It's not perfectly accurate because, for some cases, like for push, there's like 60 odd tests for push, but there's only 3 for receipts. So, it's not like the harder the feature, the higher the number of tests. That it's not distributed evenly in that way. And also some of the tests are just very sensitive to timing or ordering of requests or return status code. So Dendrite may be doing the right thing, but maybe returning a 500 when it should be returning a 400 and things like that. So these are little easy tweaks to do to kind of get those tests passing. So in general, the PsyTest, the actual true percentage will always be higher than the PsyTest percentage. In terms of where we want to go with parity, I'm going to be focusing on trying to get that federation coverage up to 100%. And that also means that we'll need to implement a few missing client server API features. So specifically receipts, because of course receipts are sent to the federation. I'm aware that SciTest doesn't fully cover, all the edge cases that federation can have, like, that can crop up in federation. And certainly, releasing the beta has kind of shown that there's lots of edge cases that you can hit, timeouts and number of servers in the room and all sorts of things. So where there are deficiencies in SciTest, I'll probably be adding some additional complement tests. So these will be brand new tests, which SciTest does not have. If you don't know what complement is, it's basically an integration test suite written in Go, because I was getting a bit frustrated with SciTest. And it all runs in Docker containers. But that's probably a talk for another time. So all the servers are in Docker containers. But yeah, so that's where we're at the moment. And we'd like to also go a bit beyond parity. So rather than just aiming to be as good as Synapse, it would be great to actually experiment with brand new stuff. So things like peaking and peaking over federation. So like the preview, peaking is previewing a room, so without actually joining the room. So it'd be great to be able to experiment with more things that might eventually land into the matrix spec proper. And Dendrite is a good kind of test bed for these kinds of ideas. The second track is scaling. So this is kind of the core thing that we kind of wanted to focus on back at Dendrite's inception. And most people are actually running Dendrite like this at the moment. So there is this big box, which is a single process, which is a monolith. And there are a bunch of databases, either a single PostgreSQL database or multiple SQLite DB files. And that's basically it. There's no real, this isn't very scalable at all, but it's still very performant in this form. And it's much easier to actually set up a Dendrite and run it in this form, which is why we encourage people to run it in this form at the moment, whilst we iron out all the issues. If we actually do want it to be, the full polylith mode, as we call it, it looks a bit more like this, which is much more complicated. You have to excuse the black arrows and the black background, just to confuse you. You'll see we've also got a load balancer in front now, because there's multiple, you have to direct requests to the right component. And there's all of these arrows internally, which are these internal HTTP APIs. So there's lots of communication, and there's the colorful arrows are Kafka logs. So you've got producers and consumers there. And it's quite complicated, and each one of these boxes, the API and the server boxes inside, they can you can run them on different machines, and that's about as far as you can get scaling wise at present. They are designed to shard, which means that you can run multiple of these servers and have these requests go to the right place, but that's not implemented yet. So for example, the room server, rather than having all of the rooms on one room server, you could have half of them on one room server and then have another room server where the other half of the room servers are. And that has a few issues, which you can probably kind of guess from this diagram, which is, okay, well, if Federation API wants to talk to the room server, does it need, how does it work out which room server to talk to? And how do you do aggregate operations, which require, all rooms to be involved? Also, if you are producing Kafka logs, you need to be careful about any ordering guarantees that you want. So you need to make sure that you're all going to the same topic and using the same key if you are producing on the same room. So things like that we need to kind of just consider. So the other bits of scaling that we want to focus on is support for virtual hosting. That is something that's come up numerous times. People have requested it, and it's something that is on our radar. The sharding, yes. So sharding, as on the previous slide here, we've got room server shards by the room, user server shards by the user ID. Things like Federation API will shard on the server name. And so most of these components, if not all actually, will shard on generally either the user, the room, or the server. We also want to kind of get better metrics for determining when to do auto scaling. So if you're on AWS and you have auto scaling groups, you might scale up if the CPU or memory usage gets too high, but that's a very brittle kind of way of scaling up and down. It'd be better if we had like, the amount of state resolution that's being done is above a certain threshold, or the number of rooms is above a certain threshold. That would be a much better way to determine how the load is being distributed and when to actually scale up and down. So that's something which we want to actually consider as well. And then finally, when you do scale up, or heaven forbid, something dies and you need to restart it, how you recover from failure. So at the moment, a lot of these components will just need to reread the Kafka logs, but obviously that doesn't scale because you can't just store all the Kafka logs from the beginning of time. So there needs to be some sort of synchronization mechanism, which then says, oh, okay, here's a chunk of data. Oh, and by the way, this is the offset you need to start from if you want to consume Kafka logs that are produced by me. That's basically about it for scaling. And the final track is peer-to-peer, which again we focused on at the beginning of the year. And with peer-to-peer, we did Dendrite.js, which was the p2p.riot.im demo, which was basically running Dendrite in the web browser, and we built it for WebAssembly and did all sorts of shenanigans to get that to work. And that used libp2p under the hood. And then Neil did the Yggdrasil Dendrite demo for iOS, which is also something that we're doing releases of reasonably frequently to try to keep up to date with as Dendrite progresses. In the coming months, we're going to Neil's primarily going to be focusing on more of the peer-to-peer bits once we've sort of sorted things out with the beta release. And we'll be trying new protocols specifically to try to do away with the full mesh routing. So at the moment, if you are in a room and there's 5 servers in the room and one server sends a message, it has to go to every other server. So you have to do 4 other additional requests. It would be better if you could do some sort of transitive operations where you send it to one and then that one forwards it on to the other ones. Because obviously in the peer-to-peer world, if you've got a 500-person room, you really, really, really don't want to be doing 500 HTTP requests. Finally, we want to be looking at implementing some of the additional bits around peer-to-peer MSCs. So things like portable identities, and if you are migrating between nodes, what kind of that data format will be involved for that. And I think, the final bit is supporting these 3 kind of areas, which is things like we really want to have some sort of feature flag support. So if you're running a peer-to-peer node, there's no point in having all the device list synchronization because you are one home server, one user, and one device on that home server. There's a lot of additional logic and bookkeeping that's done to keep device lists in sync, which just doesn't really make sense if you're running peer-to-peer nodes. So being able to disable that would be really, really good. We also want to do some more experimental MSCs. Sorry, one second. And finally, we want to do some benchmarks. So, one of the core tenets of Dendrite was to keep things being efficient. And at the moment, we haven't done any optimizations. So there's no optimizations on CPU or memory that we've specifically been doing. And we have no real way of measuring this at present. We don't have any benchmarks. So this is something we'll want to fix. So basically trying things like having lots of users, lots of rooms, states, the amount of state in the room. So that typically means the more members in the room. Lots of devices per user for just testing that device list syncing thing that I was talking about before. And that basically is mainly aimed to keep peer-to-peer efficient, because peer-to-peer nodes will run on phones or run on the web browser. So it's really important that, these things are efficient. And also for optimizing node usage. So if you're running, if you're running a big Kubernetes cluster full of Dendrite microservices, you can, obviously squeeze a bit more usage out of each node if they're a bit more efficient. And I think that's about it. If you're interested in Dendrite, please do join us on Dendrite on matrix.org. But other than that, I think I think that's about it. And that's kind of where we're at present and where we're going.
Brill. Thanks, Keegan. It's been a good summer for you and Neil hammering away on Dendrite. We've got a few comments, a few questions and comments. Jake in the thread suggested, have you seen the Netflix Chaos Monkey tooling? I think that could be really fun as a way of testing within.
Yeah, so I've heard of Chaos Monkey. Yeah, that's done by Netflix, and that is something which I'd like to look into. Which, as far as I recall, just shoots random processes in the head, and to see how it recovers. So yeah, that's something which I'd be interested in kind of giving that a go.
Yeah, I think that could be really fun. And then I guess we're getting into technical stuff. So is there a ARM64 Docker image? And why not? Says the asker.
So I mean, Go's cross compiling is really good. So you can just build it. I mean, if you want a Docker image, they're easy enough to write. We can get one up there. That shouldn't be a problem.
It's just
one. We can make one happen. That's fine.
I think I need to direct this question back to Matthew. Aaron McSween says, my neuroscientist wife wants to know what the deal is with the neuro naming scheme. Synapse, Dendrite, Dendron.
That's an excellent question. I can't remember why Synapse is called Synapse. Basically, we needed to have a name for what became Matrix. And originally, Matrix was called Synapse. So for like the first 3 or 4 months, Amandine and I were trying to basically get funding and permission to work on it. Amandine, are you out there? Do you remember why?
Because it's a big network connecting everything together. So Synapse is at the core transmitting the information, something like this.
Okay, so it's literally a pretty literal, sort of code name, and it caused one of our co-workers at the time extreme amusement because apparently it was the name of the bad computer system in Antitrust. I think if anybody's actually watched Antitrust, I haven't. But anyway, basically it was called Synapse, and then we came up with Matrix as a much better name for the protocol, but we liked Synapse, so we kept it on as the name for the reference implementation. And then that just started a whole series of bad puns about neurons and dendrites and dendrons. And I guess it's just doomed for home servers from the Matrix core team to be named after bits of neurobiology. There'll be axons, neurons, what else?
And dendrite is dendron done right.
Yes, nice.
Yeah, but that's a terrible pun, which I apologize profusely for.
At least it changes from the mathematical puns.
Yeah, precisely. Who knows what naming schemes go on in Matrix. So yeah, sorry, not a very exciting answer.
That's fine. We didn't really get any more technical questions, but I want to say thank you, Keegan, for giving a really nice explanation. Can you reiterate those numbers for spec compliance? It was up to 70% on server to server.
Yeah, I think it was 56 and 70%, basically 70%. 79%.
79, yeah.
80% basically.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, and to what extent could you just run it daily now? Not quite.
I mean, people do.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can.
But I mean, we should probably say that the initial 0.1 release has had a lot of work since whenever we cut it. I guess last Thursday.
Yeah.
And specifically, what are the changes which have happened since then? Because we must be due a new release, because there seem to be a lot of now that works and that works.
A lot of federated state resolution bugs ultimately, which have resulted in Dendrite being unable to work out what the room state is, and therefore being conservative and saying, "Hey, I'm actually happy with this event anymore." That causes people to just not see messages over federation. For certain rooms, for certain scenarios. So a lot of those bugs have been ironed out.
Yeah, so that was, I think, the main failure mode that people have been seeing, that their rooms just get stuck and they can send, but they can't receive. And I've been running my one on dendrite.arisphere.net, and every time a room wedges, I've been viciously complaining to Keegan and Neil. And I think Neil seems to have borne the brunt of chasing these nightmare state resolution bugs. But basically, it keeps getting better. So I think the only thing blocking a new release is actually doing the schema migration bit.
Yeah, yeah.
So what is the relationship between the P2P branch? Is it all in the same mainline, or is there
yeah, well, Dendrite is all in the same mainline. So there is a binary, and there's a folder, cmd/dendrite.js contains a thing you can build, which will build, if you compile it with GoOS WASM or GoOS JS, and that will just spit out a block of WASM, which you can then use on, there's a Riot Web branch called P2P. And that will, if you put the WASM into that branch and then run Riot Web, it will then effectively be a peer-to-peer node.
Gotcha. Okay.
There is a Docker file, if I recall. I think I put a Docker file which actually does all that for you. So I think I can probably find that somewhere actually.
Is that still at p2p.riot.im, right? Even though it's actually Element Web now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I haven't obviously updated it.
Yeah, that's cool. I feel like people who are willing to test this will understand. So I guess there's one more question, which is, what about migration? Will portable accounts allow you to go between your old and unfashionable Synapse server and start using Dendrite? And how can people migrate?
Well, it depends on whether Synapse implements said home server migration format, right? Because you need them to implement that and then us to be able to read that in order for that to work.
It's become a little bit of a holy war. Not really war-y, but we've got like 3 very different ways of doing it. That obviously you could just write a script to dump a Synapse database and suck it up into Dendrite somehow, and it would be like specific Synapse and Dendrite, and that would suck because it would be nice if it was usable for other things. So then there is this MSC that came from the community, came from Shadow Jonathan from memory, proposing this interchange format, which sounds pretty cool, but I'm a little bit worried about it, frankly, because it I think could be a bit of a nightmare to spec and maintain. And wouldn't it be nicer if you could use Matrix itself to migrate, given that Matrix is a replicated data replicating thing? And so I personally reckon it would be more interesting to use portable accounts to just say, hey, I want to loop over all the accounts on this server and move them over to this server, and it so happens the other server is running a different implementation. And then you swing the DNS or whatever over to the new server, and off you go. The only catch is that Neil has gone and written this MSC for portable identity, which I think at the moment assumes that the identity is entirely owned by the user. So if you as a user wanted to port yourself from one server to another, you sign some key, or you sign some data on the new server using private keys that you have from your end-to-end identity, effectively, to say, hello, I authorize this random box to host my account, which from a user empowerment perspective is fantastic, and from an end-to-end encryption perspective is great, because it's piggybacking on all of the E2E concepts-ish. But the painful reality is that that then precludes you as a sysadmin migrating all your users from Synapse to Dendrite, because you ain't got their keys and you can't go and sign them to move them over to the other server. So this is this slightly ideological question. Do the users own their identity unilaterally, or do we as sysadmins have the ability to force migrate users en masse because we want to move from this data center to another data center, or we want to shard them from here to here, or we want to add vhosting onto our platform and we're going to move everybody from matrix.org to london.matrix.org or shard28.matrix.org or whatever. So honestly, watch this space. I think there's basically the 2 competing tracks of interchange formats versus portable accounts. And if it wasn't obvious, I want to do portable accounts because they are so useful for everything. But perhaps somebody will push the migration format forward thing too.
Yeah, I mean, portable accounts would be the ideal generalized solution.
What do you think we should do, Keegan?
I don't know, is the honest answer.
You've been strategically keeping out of this.
Yes, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the entire problem space is, so I don't know.
I was talking to Neil about it, and he pointed out that you can basically just remove the attestation that the users use to prove their identity, their ownership of these accounts, and it's basically as simple as that. That you can just copy. You can move the key data over on the server, and the user doesn't have to sign it. And if people want to trust that the server is allowed to host you, then they can. But anyway, be a fun problem to get to with the portable account stuff. And I think that's more on Neil's remit anyway, as part of the P2P work that is now moving into as you go off into Synapse Dendrite parity again.
Yeah, round 2.
Indeed. we come to a natural end. Thank you, Keegan, and thank you to David, who's both David and Holger had to go away and do real life childcare. So thank you to them for taking some time out of a midweek evening to appear on Open Tech Will Save Us as well. And thank you to Keegan for being involved and giving us a great presentation. Bye. Bye.
Thank you to the founders of Matrix.
We're just here to heckle. Bye.
Yeah, bye.